All right, I thought I would summarize some of my critique of Plato. I've been arguing again about this online, I guess. Um, so, I understand why people think Plato is obviously the greatest philosopher in the Western tradition. He's the founding figure. The whole thing is footnotes to Plato. I see that. He opened up, partly this is because we lack texts in the context of Socrates and Plato. In other words, part of our impression that he opened up all these areas of inquiry has to do with the fact that we lack texts from some of his contemporaries and predecessors. But I think it's fair to say, opening up political theory as an area of systematic inquiry, aesthetics, ethics, epistemology. These are metaphysics, that's for sure. These are amazing things to establish, right? And it's not that maybe he invented the questions exactly, but his treatment of them is so much clearer and more systematic and more elaborate than any of his predecessors that we know of, Plato's. Okay, so I want to give him credit for that and for establishing the discipline that I still love and I still am pursuing. All philosophers in the West owe a debt to Plato in that regard. But there are some real bad problems from the top to the bottom, okay? I reject the philosophy and the stances that lead to the philosophy and the rhetorical strategies in which the philosophy is expressed totally. I repudiate all of Plato's positions and all of Plato's techniques. And I want to say why a little bit. I mean, one thing I want to say is that in comparison to his student Aristotle, in comparison to many of the philosophers that followed, I might adduce Hobbes in this regard, let's say, or I don't know. Plato's arguments are almost invariably extremely obviously fallacious, okay? Like, the arguments are bad. All right, so we can forgive someone, for establishing all these disciplines, but then maybe not, nailing them down exactly. But I'm telling you, man, it's over and over again you see this, and it really does make a contrast with Aristotle, who is such an ingenious and, good and common sense type also arguer. Right? Very convincing. Plato people have been convinced somehow. I have a repulsed response, so I'm not convinced. I'm convinced of the opposite every time he opens his mouth or whatever, or opens Socrates' mouth, because he operates Socrates like a sock puppet. All right, we'll get to that in a second. All right, but I mean, just like, I don't even know where to start with the fallacies. Like, all the political solutions in the Republic are grotesque, but the arguments are ridiculous, okay? Or the doctrine that knowledge is recollection, one of the most famous Platonic doctrines. Okay, that everything any of us knows, we are recalling from previous lives, or more accurately, from our time between lives, flitting through the realm of the perfect forms. Okay, so now I ask you, does that seem plausible? Okay, but then the arguments for that, it was at the Meno, I guess, are, how can we recognize that something that I've just drawn on a page is not a perfect circle? Well, we must have an idea of a perfect circle. Where could we get an idea of a perfect circle? Well, not from this world, which is so corrupt. Nothing is pure. Nothing can be known, really, about this world. In fact, that circles in this world are not real. Okay? But if we know that a circle is imperfect, or an attempt to draw a circle has failed and it resulted in an imperfect sort of circular shape, then we know what a perfect circle is. And we could not know what a perfect circle is. I mean, I'm making up the example, I guess, but it's very Socratic. Unless we recalled what a perfect circle is. Now, what are we recalling? Well, not anything in this world, because there are no perfect circles in this world, all right? And not our previous lives as animals or whatever we might have been. He does teach reincarnation, but from a time when we were disembodied souls living in a realm of pure concepts. That's the only explanation possible for the idea that we understand what a perfect circle is. All right, that's a pretty darn insane doctrine, okay? And the arguments for it are another, I mean, I guess the famous one is where he takes a slave boy who's, by definition ignorant or whatever, and teases out the Pythagorean theorem from him somehow. But it's pathetic. Like that. This is just like he just guides him right into the conclusion he wants, which is really the Socratic technique. He guides you to the conclusion that he's been aiming at this whole time, and makes you say it yourself. It makes you betray yourself so you can agree with him. This is the Socratic method. And this slave boy comes up with some geometry stuff, but all he really comes up with is nodding along, which is all any of Socrates' interlocutors finally really add up to. So it's a yes, man. Okay. So if you think that making a slave boy nod along with a geometrical proof proves that knowledge is recollection, then you are a Platonic style arguer. Okay. Or one I often adduce is, okay, here's a proof of immortality. Things come from their opposites. He gets you to accept that. You can't get bigger if you weren't littler. The big comes from the little. Okay, so he gets you to accept this kind of general principle that things come from their opposites. Things are generated from their opposites. It was a Heraclitean or Taoist principle or something. And death comes from life, and so life comes from death. So the soul is immortal. All right, I guess I'm not really going to go and refute these fallacies, but I'll tell you what, there's hundreds of fallacies, dozens of fallacies in the Republic, for example, or in any Platonic dialogue. The arguments are terrible, okay? Now, he gets credit for being the first one to do this kind of arguing, you know what I mean? Like, that we know of, especially in this elaborate basis, and really trying to clarify all these concepts and everything. But he doesn't do it plausibly. I guess I want to say, like, it's hard to judge someone from the standards of later standards, but he's an incompetent arguer, Plato, all the time. Socrates is an incompetent arguer, as portrayed by Plato. Now, let me try to, I guess I've been arguing about this in various ways. The whole idea of putting your whole authorship in the mouth of another person, in the mouth of an authority figure, a messiah. That's what Plato does, okay? Socrates is the philosophical Jesus. In some ways, the Jesus story might even be based on the myth of Socrates as the martyr for the truth and all of this. Plato's portrayal of his own views in the mouth of Socrates is a claim to authority. This is not just me saying this. This is the greatest thinker who ever lived saying this. And people thought of Socrates that way, even before his death, but certainly after his death. And so to claim the mantle of Socrates and put all your words in the mouth of Socrates is this way to claim a quasi-religious authority, an irrational authority, I say. This is a problem with Greek and Hellenistic philosophy, post-Socratic Greek philosophy. It's all rational. For the first time, we're opening up rational, secular consideration of all kinds of things. From the weather to the nature of the good life. Okay, we're opening up the possibility of science and all of this stuff. But a lot of the discourse in philosophy proper has to do with who gets the mantle of Socrates. Okay. Is it the Stoics? Is it the academic skeptics? Is it the neo-Platonists, like Plotinus or something like this, all right? Everyone's claiming the mantle of Socrates. Well, Plato did that more effectively than anyone, and he tried to monopolize Socrates and annex Socrates to Platonism. But now, speaking of fallacies, that Socrates says this is not itself a reason to believe it, though certainly all those people treated it as though it were. Okay, but that's fallacious. And furthermore, Socrates didn't say this shit. I don't really believe it. But no one really believes it. And so that's why there's these 3 periods of Plato's dialogues where it's true to Socrates, sort of true to Socrates, and then just Plato. Those are just totally made up, okay? The pose where Socrates doesn't think he knows anything is grappling with his own ignorance, and it only shows you that you're ignorant. I guess I've just said this over and over again. That's just disingenuous horseshit, okay? Every time out, there might be 1 or 2 exceptions, but more or less every time out, it's obvious Socrates knows exactly in every Plato dialogue where he's going to take you, what the true position is, and he's going to force you to it in the end. Okay, there are a few aphoretic dialogues. Even there, you get the sense that Socrates, like the Theaetetus or whatever, the Theaetetus is the most admirable one in this regard. He does not end up defining knowledge, but you get the sense that he's at least seen the problems with the other positions that no one else could see or whatever. So the whole authorship is a little like the Gospels of Jesus, I guess. And it's a contest. It's the winning entry in the contest for who gets the authority of Socrates behind their views. But that has nothing to do with whose views are true. Sorry. All right. All right. Now, and Plato is, I would say, strongly responsible for the Dark Ages. Okay. Now, of course, all this historical periodization and stuff like this is controversial, and maybe it's hyper-simplistic, but nothing could be more obvious, and it really, even in the context of Athenian culture, 400 BC, that Socrates is, as portrayed by Plato, is anti-empirical science. He's anti-empirical. Right. Knowledge for him is recollection. And empirical experience in this life has nothing to do with it, okay? Actually, empirical experience of this world is complete illusion, dude. We can know nothing about this world, but only about an abstract, stipulated world of concepts. Knowledge of this reality is impossible because this reality is an illusion. It's very Hindu, actually. Okay, very Upanishads. And I think the influence is direct, actually. or maybe telephone across South Asia. All right. So it's an a prioristic anti-science view that got taken up into the Christian religion, like sort of whole cloth, and people like Augustine. It says this world is sinful, grotesque, a delusion, and our goal is transcending it, even by death. That's why the philosopher studies to die. It's a rejection of this world, so it's a rejection of scientific inquiry into this world, which cannot yield any true knowledge, according to Plato and his followers for thousands of years. And, as Nietzsche so strongly and repeatedly pointed out, it's world negating. It's an expression of world hatred. This world is false, it's a delusion, it's a corruption. This is reflected in the worst aspects of ascetic Christianity, the worst aspects of world negating, world hating ethics, as described by Nietzsche. To get to a Renaissance, you definitely needed Aristotle, man. Like, you had to get rid of this Platonic shit eventually, right? You could see everyone struggling with it. Michelangelo is a Platonist, actually. That's why the pictures look like they do, actually. I'd rather get a nice still life of a tabletop. But anyway, okay. So the pictures look like they do because they take features of this world and try to nudge them toward Platonic forms of perfection, stuff like this. I think a real simple way to say what the emergence of science was as a rejection of Socratic a priorism, okay, or Platonic a priorism, and rationalism. And then, again, the idea of world hatred as the basic stance. And again, this infests Christianity in a very disconcerting way, right, for hundreds, thousands of years. Right, those things are bad. Real bad, I think, and now, okay, and I've argued this in a series of videos, and look at the first full episode of Totalitarians of Western Philosophy. The podcast was Plato, the Totalitarian in the Republic. Nothing could be more obvious. It's the grossest political philosophy ever articulated, or until Hegel. He says that the leaders, the philosopher kings, will rule by lies, and rule by intimidation, and rule by eugenics. He says he defines justice as each person staying in their assigned place. For real. That's Plato's definition of justice. I mean, so Rawls is a footnote to Plato because we're still talking about justice, right? But that's the least plausible and the most grossest theory of justice ever articulated. The first one. Pop, 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 pop. Right. In fact, the whole political vision of the Republic is an unbelievable nightmare of mind control and totalitarian repression, hierarchy, caste system, literally a caste system. Again, maybe something to do with the Indian subcontinent. Literally a caste system. Right? The visions are gross. The metaphysics is false. The arguments are fallacious. The basic stance is negation of the world, of a sort that will make all knowledge impossible. So, I'm saying that in many, many aspects, it's a horrible philosophy, the worst ever made, really, partly because of its how highly influential it's been. So I just thought I would sort of summarize my little attack on Plato. Again, he's sort of getting a new run because of the attention paid to Agnes Callard's book, Open Socrates, which I suppose to play on Open Sesame. But the Socrates I know is closed, dude. And, well, I just closed him. Closed for the season. Socrates.